Hi, it's Keith from the Evangelical Free Church, Stony Stratford, and we're continuing our series of short talks in the Gospel of Luke, and today we're in chapter 19, verses 28 to 44. Now, this follows on immediately after the parable that Jesus told, and we were looking at last week, which ended on a sort of theme of judgment. But now Jesus is going up to Jerusalem. We get a real sense that we are reaching a climax to Luke's gospel. And he sends two disciples ahead to pick up a donkey, a young colt that had never been ridden before. And if anyone asks, he says, say the Lord has need of it. Presumably a code, presumably this was not donkey rustling, but a couple of followers of Jesus who would then hand the animal over. Now, as Jesus approaches Jerusalem, what we're going to see today in the reading are two very, very different reactions. Firstly, we see the disciples and the reaction of presumably others who were around, not just followers of Jesus, but others in the crowd, in the pilgrimage going up to Jerusalem. After procuring the donkey, they come near to the Mount of Olives. It says the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully praising God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. Now, the disciples and others had witnessed a lot. And there's a real sense as Jesus comes up to Jerusalem, this is someone special. People had witnessed his teaching. They'd seen the miracles that had happened. It's interesting to see what they actually say, what they're shouting out when they're praising God. And the first is a quote from Psalm 118, verse 26. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. This is what's called a messianic psalm. It was a psalm looking forward to the coming of God's chosen one, God's King. What's also interesting is what they add to that, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. That's interesting because that kind of links back to the start of the book when the angels appeared to the shepherds and praised God in very, very similar words. So there's a reaction of extreme joy. But there's always someone who's not going to join the party, isn't there? And we know who's going to be. Verse 39, the Pharisees. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, Teacher, rebuke your disciples. Well, Jesus replies in this way. I tell you, he replied, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out. What Jesus is employing here is a theme, a kind of way that the rabbis taught by exaggerating. Saying, well, if you shut them up, someone, even the least likely you might expect, will praise me in some way. I was a great fan of Mad magazine growing up. I always remember a spoof advert they'd had at one point, and it was something like this. It said J.D. Quigley is a chain smoker from Pennsylvania. And he read so much about the bad effects of smoking, he gave up reading. Now, we might sort of smile a bit at that, but doesn't that tell us something? It's possible to draw the wrong conclusions. And what have the Pharisees just done? In the face of all the miracles, the teaching they've heard Jesus do, they literally want to spoil the party. Where others seem to get it, they do not. It's very telling what happens next. We read in verse 41, as he, that's Jesus, approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, if you had known on this day what would bring peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come when your enemies will build embankment against you and circle you from every side. Here's the point, isn't it? God had sent prophets. God had now sent Jesus. In fact, this is Jesus, God incarnate, coming to his people. But what had happened over the years, and we're seeing very clearly here, they didn't get it. They turned against him. And so here's the thing, there's a warning now that judgment will be the result. It's very scary, isn't it, in a way? It's a warning from Jesus. Now, what happened to this warning? Well, in AD 70, the Romans eventually got fed up with the Jews and their revolt against their occupying forces, and they literally razed Jerusalem to the ground and destroyed the temple. Many, many Jews were massacred at that time. And here's Jesus' warning. That didn't have to happen. Not exactly gentle Jesus, meek and mild, but a serious warning at the consequences of consistently ignoring God and his word and Jesus' word. What are we to make about this? Are we going to end on a bleak note? Well, it's interesting. In the start of John's Gospel, it says this, and this is John chapter 1, verse 11. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Exactly what we're seeing here. But it doesn't stop there. It says in verse 12 this, yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. God longs for people to turn to him. Why? Because actually he's a loving and forgiving God, but he's a holy God. He cannot have evil in his presence, but we can be transformed. One of my favourite verses in the Bible is this, and it's 2 Corinthians 5:21. He who was without sin became sin, that we might be given the righteousness of God. That's the promise we can have. We've got some books outside the church. You're welcome to take one. This is a good one, Ultimate Questions. Well worth a read. It's there for free. Thanks so much for listening.